Hey everyone. Welcome to Sprinto's compliance AMA session with our in-house ISO Lead Auditor Gurudev. Over the next 30 minutes, he will be answering questions related to all things compliance, especially ISO 27001, SOC 2, and the audits that come with it. Let me tell you about our speaker today. Apart from being an ISO Lead Auditor, Guru holds a cybersecurity certification and has helped over 100 companies with their compliance implementation. And thus, you can say he has hands-on experience with it. This session will be recorded and I'll be sharing the recordings with you by tomorrow. You can drop your questions in the chat and he will get to it one by one. Please ensure that if you have any follow ups, you can feel free to add it to the chat and he will get to that as well. Now, to start off, we conducted an email campaign where we asked people to share the most common questions that or common worries that they have about compliance. So, I'm just going to add that to the chat first. Guru, please start with that and then we will get to the ones that are coming up live on the chat.
Hey, thanks, Ati, for that warm welcome. Excited for this interaction today. Looking forward for a good interaction and loads of learning for us as well as the participants. So, do you have the questions?
Yes. The first one is all about how to get ISO certified. That's
Mhm.
the I think that's the first question that's come up most commonly.
Right. That's a really basic question, which is hard to answer for any company who is kind of trying to start and figure out where to start. Right. So, how to get ISO certified? To answer that, uh, the very first step in getting certified is to try and understand your own company in terms of the infra assets that are there, the background of the people working with you, right? So for smaller companies, it's a lot easier to get started and answer these questions. So as in when you grow as a bigger company, it becomes it's a lot of moving parts as you grow big, right? To start with, risk assessment is the first step that any company has to do in order to be ISO certified. This is where you kind of identify what is the scope of my ISO audit, what are the infra assets that I have to include in this audit that I'm going through, and what are the people. If you have multiple entities, let's say one in India, one in US, what are the entities that I wish to get certified for, because ISO is certified based on the entity and its region. So these are few basic questions that you would like to answer first before getting into the technical intricacies of the ISO framework itself, right? To start with, I think answering these questions around what entity is under the scope of the audit, what are the infra assets that is in the scope of the audit, and who are the people who will be part of this audit. The other main thing that you have to answer is the other main thing that you have to answer is who will be the stakeholders, right? For smaller companies, it's usually the CTO and the CXO level folks trying to answer, trying to trying to take care of the entire framework or the program for your company. But as you grow, the stakeholders might be from different teams, right? So identifying the right stakeholders is also another step that you have to do in order to get ISO certified. um, the the next steps, once you have had your answers figured out on this bit, on the scoping bit, is to uh, identify the board, or basically whether I would like to go for an Indian entity or an Indian auditor, or you would like to wish to go for an international auditor out of India who could help you with this certification, right? So that's the next step, right? Along with this, uh, using tools like Sprinto, which is typically breaking down all the controls of ISO and giving you in the form of simpler checks, right, would also help, because basically you as a business would only care about knocking out this ISO compliance in terms of having the security posture in place and knocking it out as soon as possible. So simplifying the entire process and sharing your checks in the form of these are the 10 different things that you have to do as a company would help. So tools like Sprinto, which will integrate well with your other systems, whether it's your uh, AWS, GCP, the cloud hosting infrastructure, or your email service provider, can translate all the processes into simpler checks and help you knock out this activity far easier compared to other processes out there. Right. Hope that that was a bit detailed, but hope that will help you uh, answer that question. Um, right. I have, yeah. The follow up question on that is, how long would an ISO audit take time, right? Like to be certified. The scoping exercise would typically take, I mean, depending on the size of your organization, typically takes anywhere between a week to 15 days, right? That can be reduced or simplified with the help of a consultant, or with the help of tools like Sprinto out there, right? Because they would have worked with a lot of other firms in the past. We would have worked with a lot of other companies of your size and posture. So we have a sample set to say that, hey, we've helped similar companies in the past. So depending on who you opt to work with, this scoping exercise can be done within anywhere between 2 weeks to 2 days, or fewer days, as to say, right? In terms of the other efforts that you have to put once you've identified the entire scope, is basically doing the readiness or the implementation phase. That can last anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks. That's what we've seen. And the audit itself will last no longer than 2 to 3 weeks. So somewhere near 12 to 14 months, 14 weeks is the kind of timeline that you can see for typically companies size between 1 to 100, and that's what we have seen in the past, right? So there's another question. So, what version of ISO 27001 do you provide? So, currently it's the 2013 version. 2022 is yet to be supported, right? So, the certification bodies are yet to adapt to that, to the new framework that is out there. So, there's a transition time for the auditors, the certification bodies, to reach there. It will take another 6 to 8 months, and companies who are already ISO 27000 2013 certified, they still have a couple of years to do this transition. So current version that is being supported is 27001 2013. uh, right. uh, you have more questions? Yeah, we have one more question. Do you help with audits? That's an interesting one. So typical ISO audits basically is auditors coming into your offices, interviewing with your HR, interviewing with your CTOs, right? This is meetings where you have to explain the processes, policies, and the procedures that you have set. But working with Sprinto, there's an advantage working with Sprinto is that auditors are trained on Sprinto and they conduct the audit on the platform of Sprinto. And there would be a CSM assigned to you who would work or walk this journey of the implementation for your ISO. And by the time you reach the audit conversation with your auditor, the CSM would be aware of your system, your entire posture, in a way to explain it to the auditors, right? So we'll be front facing the audit, and Sprinto system is what is being audited. So it's a loss. The entire exercise is a hassle-free experience for you as a end user, right? So you don't have to deal with understanding what are the compliance genres out there, what are the jargons that you would want to be familiarized yourself with, and you don't have to go through policy documents in detail in order to kind of answer these audit questions. So we'll do that for you. Hope that answers your question. Um, can you share more information on the requirements of risk assessment from ISO point of view? Yeah, that's a really good question. Uh, so basically, it's important to identify various. The first step is the risk assessment that we have to conduct. So here is where we categorize the risk items, whether it's data security, or whether it's data classification, or whether it's endpoint protection, right? These are categories of your risk items. So out of this category, there can be 10 to 20 checks that that are follow-up checks under this particular category, right? And there can be overlap between these categories also under this risk category that we have identified. Once we have sure about, we have identified all the risk categories, we can start listing down all the checks that are applicable for each and every category. Now, the depth of these checks is something that is not defined in ISO, right? So you can go up to 20 checks, 30 checks, and say, I want a more mature program. I want security in depth, and I want to cover everything that is possible for this particular category of risk. You're free to do that. But so, what your customers are initially looking for, or the auditors are initially looking for, is baseline security measures, whether the baseline security measures are implemented or not. To start with, what we tell our customers is to implement the baseline security measures, get through the initial audit, that is your stage one audit of ISO. And once you have successfully passed your stage one audit, which is also called as the intent audit, you prove the intent that you want to be secure and you have implemented things. From there onwards, you can build your security posture, do a lot more detailed risk assessment year after year, and mature your program, right? So ISO does not itself define these risk items. You're free to do that. Um, but yeah, the risk categories is where you start with, and then followed up by the checks that are there, and then a more mature program as and when you grow. Hope that answers your question, Ritvik. I think we have. If there's any follow-up question, feel free to ask that question from. Yeah, what's an ISO questionnaire, and how is it similar, and is it similar to the steps taken to get to audit? I'm not sure what is the ISO questionnaire, but is it something? I'm guessing this is something which your customers must have asked you. It is a derivative, if I'm understanding this rightly. It is a derivative of they're trying to understand your security posture, because you might not have a ISO certification in place. They might have derived a list of checks or questions out of the ISO framework, right? These are these are something they want you to answer and share how you are posing against each of these questions with some evidence, right? So unlike any security questionnaire that you might receive, this is a derivative from the ISO 27001, is my understanding here. Right, and is it similar to the steps taken to get to audit? It might be close, but I'm not sure if it is the exact if it is the exact list of list of things that you would have to be fulfilling. But if you have answered security questionnaires in the past, that is a derivative of ISO, and you are sure about that, sure about the security posture that you implemented in order to answer these questionnaires, I think you've already gotten started, and you would already be far ahead compared to someone who has not started this journey, right? Because you've already answered, and you've also already implemented few things in order to be able to answer these questions out there in the security questionnaire. Right, so this just makes your journey easier if you already started with this journey, right? Yeah, that's about the questionnaire bit. How long does the ISO audit valid for? Yeah, that's a really good question. So basically, ISO is a 3-year commitment for anybody, any company getting started. So you start with your stage one audit, then the stage two audit, and then the certification is issued for the first year, and then there is a surveillance audit for the next 2 years. So you have to maintain the security posture for the entire year, provide evidence to the auditors when the surveillance audit comes, and you'll be recertified. So the validation of the certificate is every year for the next 2 years, right? So the in total it's a 3-year journey. After the third year, you go for a entirely new certification. So the validity is expired, and you'll be issued a new certificate after the 3-year cycle. So what is really important in this 3-year journey is to the most difficult part that we have found customers having gone through this journey is that if in case you're not using tools like Sprinto, where the evidence collection is automated, right? you would have to maintain a database or a place where you manage all your evidence, right? And this would be a overhead for anybody to do, because you have to make sure all the evidences are up to date for the entire 3 year. So a lot of the burden can be reduced if this is automated. So that's what Sprinto can also help you with in this 3 year long commitment that you have for ISO 27001, right? So I think we have. I hope that answers your question. Let me know if you have any follow-ups on that. Can we do both ISO and SOC 2 simultaneously? That's a really good question. Basically, yes. The answer is yes. You can do both ISO and SOC 2 simultaneously. Uh, in SOC 2, there are two flavors. I think you've specifically asked that question also. SOC 2 Type 2, yes. So basically, for the general audience, just to explain what SOC 2 Type 2 and Type 1 is, there are two flavors to SOC 2. SOC 2 itself is a US recognized industry standard, and it's also seen as gold standard in the IT practices in US, and it's widely adopted for by the cloud companies out there. And most of the vendor assessments, they consider SOC 2 report if you're trying to sell to the US market. That will be the first requirement that they put across. Are you SOC 2 compliant? Now, this SOC 2 is having two flavors: SOC 2 Type 1, Type 2. Um, Type 1 is a point in time audit where you take all the evidences, you tell the auditor that, hey, I'm ready to be audited as of this given day. I'm following all the checklists that AACP has suggested as part of SOC 2. And you are certified, or it's not a certificate for SOC 2, it's a report. The end result is a report, it's not a certificate. So the independent auditor will issue a report which outlines the entire security posture of yours. Right? So that's SOC 2 Type 1, where it's a point in time audit. Right? Type 2 is very similar to ISO in many because there is an observation period. So you have to stay compliant during this observation period. The minimum time period for observation for SOC 2 Type 2 is 3 months, right? So post your 3 month audit, you can go for a yearly cycle after that, right? It becomes more like ISO. So the best thing to do, if in case you're getting started and you want to do both SOC 2 Type 2 and ISO 27001, you can get started with the implementation. The implementation will be a lot similar, although these are two different governing bodies, two different standards out there. The list of controls, the checks itself are not distinct, right? So they're a lot similar in terms of implementation. Security, availability, and confidentiality. These are the three trust service criterias we try to cover, or most of the companies out there try to achieve with SOC 2. Similar headers or similar segments are targeted in ISO 27001 as well. So yeah, so you can get started with the implementation. There's not much of a deviation with respect to implementation. The deviation starts when you go for the audit and the report. For ISO, it's a certificate, and for SOC 2, it's a report. So the procedures, the documentation that you have to follow for both these certificate and the report is a bit different. So we can help you with that as well. So that's where the deviation start. To answer your question, yes, you can start with both ISO and SOC 2 simultaneously. Within a period of 3 to 4 months, you can achieve your first ISO certification plus your first SOC 2 Type 2 with a 3 month observation window. Right, and from there you can do a yearly cycle. That's an idea when it comes to how to proceed with both, right? There's a follow-up question on the same. Yeah, so it's not necessary. The question is it necessary to go for SOC 2 Type 1 and then Type 2? It's not necessary to go for SOC 2 Type 1. There's no mandate from AICPA for you to have your Type 1 report in order to get to the Type 2 phase. You can directly start with Type 2, but the concern, or what we educate the customer with, is we would want the customers to first understand the process by implementing Type 1, and they get to know what are the controls that have to be maintained in the long run. Because once you're in the observation period, if things start starts to fail, that's a record which will be shared as it is as evidence, right? So to have better chances of having a successful type 2 audit, it's good to have type 1, but it's not a mandatory, right? If you're confident of executing type 2, and with all the help that uh, we could also offer, uh, you can directly get started with your type 2 as well, right? Do small companies, I think there's hope that answers your question, Pradeep. Like, feel free to share any more follow-ups that you have. um, there's a question on the same. I think means will it mean that there should be a gap of at least 3 months between type 1 and type 2? Am I correct? Yes, because you would have got your type 1 today, and at the same time, parallelly, you would have started your observation period for type 2. So not necessarily a gap. It's the observation period that you are in, and post your observation period is completed, you'll go for an audit. So it's not necessarily a gap, it's an observation period that you're in. So just like how you can start ISO and SOC 2 type 2 together, you can start your SOC 2 type 1 and type 2 journey also together, right? You get your type 1, knock it out of the way, you're already also in the observation period while you get your type 1 report, and you complete your 3-month observation period and go for an audit to get your first SOC 2 type 2. That's also a feasible option out there. Hope that answers your question. Right. So, do small companies need ISO? That's an interesting one. All companies who are trying to be competitive, the whoever are trying to compete with the other big firms, right, to get their share of the business in the market, would have to stay compliant, would have to showcase their compliance in some form to their customers to instill confidence, right? So whether you're small or big, irrespective of that, your customers are going to care about your security posture. So it is important for you to prove that you are secure in one form or the another, whether you're going to do ISO 27001, or you're going to do SOC 2, or you're going to do GDPR or HIPAA, which are regulatory frameworks, not standards out there. But it all depends on what you're trying to achieve, and whether your customers care about your security posture, which is always the case, right? For an example, we have worked with companies sized 2 to 3, a couple of co-founders and their first engineer who's the CTO, right, to companies who are less than 10, right? Like, that's also a bigger portion of the customer set that we have worked in the past. So all these customers are targeting enterprise clients, right? So these companies definitely get asked with a lot of security questionnaires and questions out there. So it's really important for them to stay secure. So to answer your question, yes, to all companies who are trying to be competitive will need ISO 27001, right? I think there's, will you please elaborate on SOC 1 and SOC 3? Yeah, so SOC 1 is more into the financial aspects of your entity. If you're an entity that has any financial impact on your customers' uh, accounting statements, or your customers' financial statements, or in simpler terms, if your product that you're selling or your service has any impact on your customer's financial statement, they ask you for a SOC 1 report, right? So there are SOC 1 audits very similar to how SOC 2 audits also happen, but the nature of the audit, the nature of the implementation is completely different when it comes to SOC 1 and SOC 2. What is SOC 3? Right, like basically it's just a format of the report which is very similar to ISO certification that you get issued, which you can actually publicly post in your website, right? So SOC 2 report is more confidential. You can't actually SOC 2 and SOC 1 reports are more confidential. These are 60 to 70 page documents which you can publish in public, which has a lot of information about your entity, your company, your infrastructure. So SOC 3 reports are some post publicly. It's more of a certificate that is issued from AICPA. That's the only difference. But there are only two things. One is SOC 1, SOC 2 audits. So these are the two things. SOC 3 is just about how you display the credentials that you have, right? Um, is ISO 27001 better for startups than compared to SOC 2? Um, I don't think it's a binary question where it's this versus that. It all depends on the kind of markets that you're trying to target, like the go to market that you have in mind. If your market, and that's what we have understood in the past. So if a lot of our customers who target the US market, they are asked for SOC 2. So if your go to market is US, start with SOC 2. If your go to market is more of Europe and the Asian countries where ISO is renowned and well known, you can start with ISO 27001. But with proper support, I think both of them will not be a hurdle for you to cross, right? And it's important for startups to start early with their security practices as well. So what we have seen is, as companies grow big with a lot of moving parts out there, it becomes a lot difficult in decision making as well as in implementation side of things. So it's a lot simpler if you adapt to these frameworks out there as soon as possible, right? And you always have a competitive advantage against your other competition out there when you say that you've instilled the best of security practices vetted out by the best of auditors out there, and you have the reports in hand, so that will always give you a competitive advantage. Hope that answers your question, Nitra. Do you have more question? Great. I think we're at the last 5 minutes check mark. Do we have?
5 minutes of the event. So if you have any questions, any other confirmations, please add it here. And if you want to reach out particularly to know more about ISO 27001 or SOC 2 in detail, you can reach out to Gurudev. I'm just adding his email in the chat. And if you want to see how Sprinto can help you with getting these infosec compliances in check, or like how we can help you implement SOC 2 ISO, in fact multiple frameworks at the same time, then please reach out to sales@sprinto.com. I will also, if you, I'll also be personally sharing the recording with you in case you want to revisit some of these questions or know more about the answers that were shared. So feel free to reach out to us and ask any questions that you might have. If you want to book a demo with us, just let us know, and we'll be happy to set up the conversation. Thank you. Thanks, Guru. I hope you guys all had your ISO questions and SOC 2 questions answered. Thank you. Thanks, Guru, for your time. And take care, everyone. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Atik. Thanks everyone for being available and taking time out.